Welcome to the Business of Family podcast, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm a family business advisor. In this episode, I'll be talking to Melody Gratic, and she is the CEO and founder of Xcelmio. So stay tuned for this fascinating conversation. Well, hi, Melody. Welcome.
Hi, Tammy. It's been a minute, but it's good to see you today.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. We have a very interesting topic that's very relevant to family-run businesses, and particularly the family-run businesses that we deal with, which are first to second generation. And so we're going to talk really about the generation gap. That's a massive, massive topic.
It's a massive topic because the new generation operates distinctly different from us that are maybe Generation Xers or even the silent generation. So understanding their dynamics and what motivates them is key to working successfully with them.
Right. So tell me a little bit about your company.
Well, just a little bit about Xcelmio. We started it as a leadership training and development company where we coach leaders from all generations, and specifically the CEO or business owners, emerging leaders, and those that are contemplating going into leadership positions. We provide learning management tools for them, tools and resources to, again, enhance and make them more effective as leaders in their organizations.
Interesting. And then that's really, really needed a lot. Particularly now there's a lot of transitions going on, and particularly for our businesses, the family businesses, there's 60% going to transition in the next 6 to 10 years, 60% of family businesses in North America. That's crazy. So there's a lot of coaching and training required. But one of the things that I come across a lot is the issues between, parents, founder, they're 50, 60, 70, and the next gen. And I know we've talked about this offline before, but I really like you to give me a little bit of characteristics for the listening audience of what each generation is. I get caught up. I don't even understand them all. All I know is that I'm the tail end of the boomers, and that's all I know.
Well, I would be happy to offer you some guidelines, and to your listening audience some guidelines. And one of the things about the silent generation, they are our traditionalists. They grew up in a different era. And it's, again, the era where there was the Civil War was happening. There was different wars taking place. And they are some of the most dedicated and loyal, committed individuals. And with that, because they were working towards a pension and a retirement, which is almost non-existent in some organizations now. You have to do the 401k. So when you're working with someone that is the silent generation, those traditionalists, you're looking at people that are committed and dedicated, a little distinctly different from the baby boomers, which you said you were at the latter category of the baby boomers.
Right. And then, so there's a lot more. There's the millennials, there's Gen X. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
I am a Generation Xer, and I'm proud of it. I grew up in the 70s, and so you're going to find Generation X from this, they were born in around the 60s and up until, in my category, the 70s. And so what's rich about the Generation Xers we are that generation that is adaptable, resourceful, and proficient with technology. So again, we want work-life balance, and we want to have a casual work environment. And so what's rich about us is we're sandwiched between the baby boomers who are about to retire from the workforce and the millennials who are right on our heels. So it's a kind of a great, nice place to be as a Generation Xer, but we do bring something different to an organization. We're still committed and we're still loyal, but we do want that adaptability and flexibility like the millennials.
So tell me a little bit more about the millennials. Tend to get a bad rap. I mean, when you're talking to employers, it's always like, oh, those millennials. I mean, they get a bad rap. Tell me a little bit more about, the characteristics of millennials.
Well, I like the millennials, but that's just my personal opinion of the millennials. But they bring some innovative thought processes to the workforce because they were born with technology. So they
Hmm.
are adept at technology, and more than anything, that's the digital proficient generation. Whereas our sandwich or our silent generation is the generation that's not as digitally proficient. And so the each generation can learn different skill sets or traits from the other generation. But what's really excellent about that, they do get that bad rap because they're inclined to move from organization to organization 18 to 24 months. You may keep them about 18 months or 24 months, but more than likely they're looking to get promoted. They are entrepreneurial and they're looking to, again, multitask, and they communicate entirely different. This is the generation that had the hashtags. They're accustomed to Twitter, Snapchat, and all of those different social media apps that we sometimes shy away from.
And what is the age group of the millennials now?
So the silent generation, I'll recap some of those for you.
Okay.
They were born in 1928 up to 1945 for the silent generation. And they're from 79 to 96 years old. So baby
Mhm.
boomers and some of the Generation Xers find themselves taking care of their grandparents
Hmm.
now,
Or
or
they
they're
still own a
aging.
business, right? They
They
haven't given it up yet.
they haven't given it up. People are working into their 80s
Hmm.
now. They're still on jobs, performing the day-to-day tasks, and they are some of those business owners that you work with. And so they're still, yes, they're past retirement according to society, but for them, they love to work and they have a
Hmm.
hard work ethic. So that's why you still see some of them in the workforce. Baby boomers, however, were born in 1946 and between 1946 and 1964, and they are from 60 to 78 years old. So these are the millennials and Generation Xers that are either moving back home with their parents because of the economy, but those are our baby boomers. Your Generation X, born in 1965 to 1980, 44 to 59 years old, and that is still young. So Generation Xers, 44 to 59, and they can relate to millennials because they're so close to the millennial generation. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. So as we look at these dates, think about what was happening in society around these years. And that's what shapes how they operate and what motivates them.
Hmm.
They are between 28 years old and 43 years old. So they're not that old. And they, again, are that generation that also brings fresh new ideas and approaches to how things are done in the workplace, which they do get a bad rap for because they move about just like Generation Z when it comes to commitment to a company or an organization.
Mm.
Gen
Right.
Z, born in 1997 up to 2012. That is the generation that's up and coming behind the millennials, and they have entered the workforce because they are between 12 to 27 years old. So your
Right.
newest generation in the workforce is Gen Z.
So I have a
And
Gen Z and I have a millennial in my own in my own
wow,
house. Barely, like barely. So
barely.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so you are having that firsthand or lived experience with a Gen Z and a millennial.
Yes, and they are different, let me tell you. So when you're working with teams, like how do you, or what are the strategies that you use to work together to sort of cultivate that multi-generational team cohesion, whether it be family members in the business or just, other hires into a business? What are some of the strategies that Xcelmio does or uses?
I One of the strategies, of course, we do leadership assessment tools. And so there's the personality assessment tools, there are the leadership assessment tools, but we listen and we are proponents that leaders listen to the generations, listen to understand and not to just respond. Take a pause and a break to reflect on what they are saying. Because something of what most of the time they have something valid to contribute
Hmm.
to how things can be done differently. And
Right.
so we say you can agree to disagree, but you can disagree amicably and move the organization forward. And the way to move the organization forward is through those innovative ideas and concepts or suggestions that they may bring. And so listening sessions help.
Mhm.
Yes, training, because I am a proponent and a lifelong learner. So training helps absolutely. But we reinforce that with the layer of coaching where leaders can come to us and get one-on-one how to, because we believe that the answer lies within the individual, and we just ask different thought-provoking questions. We become their thinking partner in their process for growth. And one way to do that is through coaching, but the elements of an assessment tool, strategy mapping that we also do along with training, we do those layered reinforcement to ensure that that person is moving forward, the organization is moving forward, and that, there's buy-in, of course, from the leadership. But outside of that, let's work with those individual teams or departments or divisions with different tools, focus groups,
So if you
surveys.
got a, yeah, so if you've got it, so let's just go back to our, for our listeners and say, okay, I'm a family business, and I don't really understand coaching. I don't really want, I don't know what a coach does. And you say, well, look, here's a couple of tools. Like, so what you said communication tools or personalities, but if you're saying, okay, there's multi-generational, there's a big gap between having a 28-year-old or a 25-year-old in your business and a 65-year-old. There's a lot of different technology, a lot of difference in work ethics, all kinds of stuff. So what are, like, other than doing a tool, is there like a checklist that says, okay, remember this? Like, do you have a simplified list? Because we all can't have you in to do some coaching. What's some of the key points to remember?
Key points to remember, something that we all kind of learned when we came into the workforce is respect everyone. And if I were to give you a list, it would be respect every individual for the value that they bring to the organization.
Mhm.
Listen to understand.
Right.
So if we respect and we listen and we have open, honest, transparent communication throughout our processes, then we can now have that feedback loop without having, yes, an external coach can come in because we don't have a bias, but we are invested into everyone working together in harmony, meaning that
Mhm.
there's organizational health or there's business ownership health in how we work and relate to each other. A lot of this is drilled down to interpersonal relationships and interpersonal skills. And that
Mhm.
again is the old, it's something new, it's got a spin on it, but it goes back to communication, compassion, consideration of others that's in the workforce, valuing them. We're talking about diversity on one of the podcasts I did before. And, the thing is that people want to be respected, they want to be seen, and they want to be heard. Using
Right. And
inclusive.
that's pretty much across the board for any of us, regardless of age, right? We all want respect, and we want people to listen to us, and we want to be heard. So that goes across the board for anybody. So, note to every employer, every family business, just listen, respect, your, not only your family members, but your coworkers. But is there something that you can say to family members or businesses dealing with these multi-generation family members or employees, to say, look, here's the characteristics of, you're going to be really dealing, I'm sure, with a family business in Gen Z, probably, maybe millennials, and that, who else is there to say, what is the difference between us? Like, what are the things you need to look for, and be mindful that they, like you say, they come from a different era, they have a different technology, they don't have the same work ethic, or do they? Is it just different? Like, key points to keep in mind when you're hiring somebody younger. Any tips?
It really is flexibility and being open minded, which is the growth mindset, to kind of expand that they're getting work done. They're just doing it differently. They prefer remote work opposed to being in the office in a brick and mortar because they like open spaces. If they want to go by the water at a park and work from a park bench, they're still being productive with their headphones on, but they have their computer and they're completing their task and their assignments with different integrations and tools that they're really savvy with. And so they just prefer, they want to travel in work. And so
Right. Yeah.
understanding those characteristics helps us as leaders to better engage and interact with them, to have that professional relationship with them. Is that flexibility does not mean that they're slacking off, as many of us would kind of coin it or term it.
Hmm.
It's more or less just, I want to go to the library and work. I
Right.
want to work.
And we
I
have a
want to work.
problem with that, right? I mean, we as the older generation, whether it be the Xers or the boomers, that we didn't have that. We didn't grow up with that. And the people making the decisions today in businesses are of that era generally, unless it's a new startup tech company and they understand each other. But we have a hard time with that. I think because we weren't used to that. We feel that you need to be part of a team, you need to be around each other, you need to be face to face, you need to create, we always wanted to create a team where you wanted to help each other. Where remote is now, it's just a job, whether you're working for this company or that company. So, how can we be flexible in allowing them to work, but also develop that sense of loyalty to the company? Or is that possible? Or is it just the thing we get used to that it's going to be a high turnover?
Well, to reduce turnover in your organization and be an attractive organization for the Gen Z and the millennials to want to be a part of, one aspect of Gen Z and the millennials that I actually appreciate is their social consciousness. They are socially aware of what's going on in the world. They have a more global perspective of all that's going on around them when it comes to social justice and equity and fairness for everyone in the workforce. And so they're more inclined to have that global awareness and that social awareness that they bring to the table. But understanding requires trust. And so leaders are having to find themselves since COVID, and COVID was a of epic proportion for every generation to have to deal with, because it was a complete shutdown, and all businesses, small, large, medium, had to shift the way they did things. They had to change some things, and they had to adapt to people are not in the office anymore, and productivity increased. Data shows from different surveys, McKinsey and Company, Lean In, and all the other companies, Gallup, everyone has did surveys to show that productivity increased during COVID while people were working remotely, whether it was in their office, in their bedroom, in their kitchen, in their living room. They were still as equally as productive as in the office, because now they were having meetings on Zoom, WebEx, all the different virtual tools that we now have access to and are enjoying. Even with this podcast, we're able to do remotely and not have to. And so there was a cost savings that organizations incurred as a result of this global shift that took place. And so
Hmm.
that showed, even as horrific as it was in some aspects because of the people that lost family members and relatives during that time, it also demonstrated that it was possible for people to work remotely and still get work done for their organizations.
Well, I tell you, we're just about out of time. And this conversation has been fabulous. And I want to have you back. But before we leave, because I think we're so much more, I mean, there's so many rabbit holes I could have jumped down. I love it. So I want to have you back. But I do want you to, wrap up. I want a couple of things from you. I want you to give me 3 tips. So your 3 best tips for family businesses dealing with, the difference in characteristics of each generation, or, how do you, with the 3 tips a family business owner could take away after listening to this podcast and say, I'm going to implement this, I'm going to think differently, I'm going to do this. What are the 3 biggest tips that you could give our family business owners?
Have that courageous conversation. And it's not going to be one single conversation. It's going to be multiple touch points and conversations that you have with the millennials and Gen Zs that's part of your family owned business. Have those conversations, but be open minded during that conversation and being willing to listen to a different way of doing things. Different does not necessarily mean bad or negative. Different can be good. There's a plethora of information on YouTube, Google University, as well as YouTube University to plug in. There's infographics on our website as well, dealing with the multiple generations in the workforce. Take those tips that we shared today, some of the characteristics associated with each generation, and employ those in how you interact with your employees, which are Generation Z and Millennials.
But I'd love to have you back to talk about, what are the things that influence and shape a generation? I'd love to have you back to talk about that and how it impacts the growth in our businesses, because I do think that it's very difficult, particularly when you're a family business and you built the business, because don't forget, we're dealing with first and second generations. That I'll use me as an example. I built the business a certain way with a certain strategy that doesn't apply anymore, but I don't know any different. That's how I started my business. And it was very difficult for me the first few years with my son working with me to allow him to be his own person, to know that, never did it that way. I don't know how that's going to work. So it's very difficult for us to open our minds. So I'd love to have you back to talk a little bit about how we do that and to make it easier to talk to our children and to deal with our employees that are of that same age category. I think that's a really big topic, and we could spend a whole year talking about this.
Sure thing. I would absolutely love to come back on to discuss and unpack that further because it is layered and it's not a single approach. I like to say a multifaceted approach that business owners have to employ when working across generations.
Yes, and I think it's kind of like when you have a new dog and you need the training. It's not the dog that needs the training; it's the handler and the owner that needs the training. I think it's the same thing with us, either us boomers or Xers. That we're the ones who need the training, not the next generation. But they are different, and they're doing well. And it's hard for us to figure out how they do it when they're not doing it the way we did it. But anyway, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Melody, from where exactly are you located?
I am in Northern Virginia. It's a place called Stafford, Virginia. Proud to be in the DMV area here next to Washington, D.C. So south of Canada, and love it. Love the Four Seasons.
So Melody, if people wanted to reach out to you or find you, where could they find you?
Well, the website is www.xcelmio.com, and that is XCELMIL.com.
Excellent. Well, that's fabulous. Is there an email to reach you at, or is it info or?
It's info@xcelmio.com, and I'm also out on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there. That is my primary social media channel.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to having you back.
I look forward to being back. Thank you so much, Tammy. I appreciate being on with you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Amy White from Last Digging. Until next time, keep it in the family.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.